like it meant to scrape the place clean. The moon hung thin and pale, and the cattle down by the fence shifted uneasy, sensing something they could not name. Inside the house, lamplight trembled on rough plank walls, and a man who had learned to count every coin twice sat at a table with his hat laid flat before him. He was a rancher of the old sort, shaped by dry summers, hard winters, and years of silence. He did not speak much, and when he did, words came out plain and final, like fence posts driven deep. The money lay between them, stacked careful and straight. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to change a life. It had taken him years to save it, hauling beef to town, mending wire by hand, and sleeping alone in a house that still smelled faintly of another time. The money was meant for land or a new roof or maybe just peace. Instead, it sat there as payment for a promise that made his jaw tighten every time he thought on it. Across from him sat a young woman, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor as if the boards held answers. Her dress was plain and worn at the hem, dust-stained from travel. She had been brought here by need, not choice, by a world that did not spare kindness for those without a name or a place. She was not afraid in the loud way. Her fear was quiet, settled deep, learned early. It showed in how she breathed, slow and careful, like she was counting the seconds until something broke. She had been told what the money meant. She had been told what was expected of her. The words still rang in her ears, heavy and sharp. You paid for me, now do what you came to do. The thought burned with shame and anger and something like resolve. She had decided long before she reached this ranch that if she had to endure another bargain made over her body, she would meet it standing. The rancher cleared his throat. He had faced storms that tore roofs clean off and men who tried to steal his cattle in the night, but this felt worse. He had agreed to the arrangement because it seemed like the only way to keep the place alive. He needed a wife on paper, someone to make the town stop whispering, someone to help him hold what little he had left. He told himself it was practical, nothing more. Still, he could not look at her without feeling the weight of the money between them. Outside, the wind slammed a shutter. The sound made her flinch, and he noticed. He had not meant to. He had grown used to not noticing people. Loneliness does that. It narrows your world until only work remains. Yet here she was, breathing the same air, caught in the same hard country. He pushed the money aside and stood, the chair legs scraping loud in the quiet room. He told her she could have the small room off the kitchen. He said she could eat when she liked, work if she wanted, rest if she did not. His voice was rough, unused to offering anything. She looked up then, surprised, searching his face for the trick. There was none. Only a tired man trying to do one decent thing without knowing how. That was how it began, not with passion or tenderness, but with two strangers sharing a roof under false terms. The town would call her his wife by morning. Papers would be signed. The law would nod and move on. What happened inside the house would be their burden alone. Days passed slow and tense. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the creak of the well handle at dawn, the way the sun climbed over the hills and set the fields glowing gold. She cooked simple meals and swept floors worn smooth by decades of boots. He worked from first light to dark, fixing what broke, checking fences, speaking little. When they crossed paths, there was a stiffness, an unspoken question hanging between them. At night, she lay awake listening to the house settle. She wondered what he expected, what he might demand when patience ran out. The bargain still stood, no matter how gentle his manner. She reminded herself not to trust it. Kindness could change without warning. She had learned that lesson the hard way. He, too, lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He told himself he had done right, that he would not take what was paid for simply because he could. But the town would expect a marriage to be a marriage. Neighbors would watch. The law might not care about feelings, but it cared about appearances. Every creak in the hallway made him tense, torn between duty and decency. Whispers reached them both. In town, women looked at her with a mix of pity and judgment. Men glanced too long. Someone laughed behind a hand. The rancher heard it all when he went for supplies. He kept his head down and his temper leashed, but the words followed him home like burrs stuck to his coat. One evening, a storm rolled in fast. Thunder cracked so close it shook the windows. She dropped the plate and it shattered on the floor. He rushed in at the sound, then froze, unsure if his presence would calm or frighten her. She stood among the broken pieces, shaking, rain leaking through the roof in steady drops. For a moment, the distance between them felt like a canyon. She straightened and met his eyes. There was a challenge there now, sharpened by weeks of waiting. The bargain sat between them again, invisible but solid. She spoke, her voice low but steady, reminding him of the agreement without saying it plain. The words were not an invitation. They were a line drawn in dust. He felt anger rise, not at her but at the world that put them there. He answered slow, telling her she was not an object and this was not that kind of house. The storm raged on, rain hammering the roof, thunder rolling like the end of things. She did not know whether to believe him. Trust did not come easy, especially not bought. When the storm passed, nothing was settled. The house smelled of wet earth and broken crockery. They cleaned up in silence, each lost in thought. The papers said one thing. Their hearts said another. Somewhere between duty and choice, a decision waited to be made. As night fell, the ranch lay quiet again, cattle huddled, stars creeping back into the sky. Inside, two lives stood on the edge of something neither had planned. The town would keep watching, the bargain would keep pressing. And sooner or later, one of them would have to decide what being a wife truly meant, and what kind of man a rancher would be when faced with the price he had paid. Morning came thin and gray, the kind that crept in without promise. The rancher rose before the sun, as he always had, pulling on boots still damp from the storm. The house felt different now, fuller somehow, though the rooms were the same size they had always been. He paused in the doorway to the kitchen, listening. She was already awake, standing at the table, pressing dough flat with careful hands. The sound of it, soft and steady, settled something in him he did not know had been loose. They spoke little over breakfast. The stove popped and hissed, and the smell of bread filled the room. He ate slow, thinking on fences that needed mending and a calf that had gone lame near the creek. She watched his hands when he poured coffee, rough and scarred, hands that had built this place from nothing. She wondered how a man could live so long with so little company and still keep his edges from turning sharp. After he left, she stepped outside. The land rolled wide and open, grass still bent from rain, the sky pale as a washed sheet. It was beautiful in a hard way. She had known cities that swallowed people whole and towns that chewed them up and spat them out. This place felt honest, at least. Honest about how much it could take from you. She had come from farther east, from a stretch of river towns where work dried up and promises were easy to make and easier to break. Her father had died young, worn down by a mill that never cared. Her mother followed not long after, leaving her to learn fast how to survive. She had scrubbed floors, stitched seams, and learned to keep her head down. When the offer came, wrapped in polite words and ugly truth, she took it because there was nothing else left to take. The rancher worked through the morning, the weight of the land pressing familiar against his shoulders. He had been born into dust and debt, raised on a spread that barely held together. His own father had been a quiet man, kind in small ways, distant in all others. When he died, the rancher inherited more responsibility than land. He had lost his mother earlier, the house growing emptier each year until silence became a habit. He had never thought much about marriage, not until the banks started circling and the town began to talk. By midday, a rider appeared on the far ridge, a dark shape against the sky. The rancher stiffened. Visitors were rare and rarely good news. The rider turned toward the house, moving at an easy pace, too easy for someone with honest business. The rancher leaned against the fence, watching, measuring the distance, thinking on the money that had changed hands and the eyes now watching his place. The rider was a man from town, one who smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. He tipped his hat and spoke friendly enough, asking after the weather, the cattle, the new wife. The word landed heavy. The rancher answered plain, offering nothing extra. The man's gaze slid past him toward the house, curious and sharp. He said the town was buzzing, that folks liked a story, especially one bought and paid for. The rancher felt his jaw tighten. Inside, she saw them through the window. She wiped her hands on her apron and felt the old fear stir. She had learned to read men from a distance, learned when to disappear and when to stand firm. She stayed where she was, back straight, eyes steady, refusing to be summoned like property. The writer left with a laugh and a warning wrapped in cheer. He said the law liked things tidy, like marriages that looked like marriages. He said trouble followed folks who tried to bend rules too far. The rancher watched him go, dust rising behind the horse. The land seemed quieter after, as if holding its breath. That evening, the rancher told her what had happened. He did not soften it. He believed in plain truth even when it cut. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded tight. She had known this would not stay private. Deals never did. She asked him what he planned to do. He did not answer right away. They sat across from each other, the table between them again, though no money lay there now. He said he would not force her to play a part she did not choose. He also said the world outside did not care much about choice. She nodded. She had lived under that rule most of her life. In the days that followed, the pressure grew. Neighbors found reasons to stop by. A woman from town brought a pie and questions wrapped in sugar. A preacher mentioned vows and duty in a voice meant to carry. Each visit left the house heavier. At night, the rancher walked the yard, thinking on how close the edge had come. She lay awake, listening to his boots on the boards, wondering if safety was just another story people told themselves. Work helps some. She learned the land, learned where the ground dipped and where it held firm. She helped with the calves, surprising him with a steady hand and a calm voice. He watched her from a distance, respect growing where suspicion had lived. She was stronger than he had guessed, not loud about it, just solid. One afternoon, a stranger appeared near the creek, poking around where the water ran low. The rancher confronted him, words sharp. The man claimed he was only passing through, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the house. The rancher escorted him off the land, hand close to his side. That night, he barred the door for the first time in years. She noticed. Fear crept back in, cold and familiar. She asked him if there was danger. He said not yet, which was not an answer. He told her to keep close to the house and to trust no one from town. She wanted to ask if she could trust him. The words stayed stuck. As the weeks wore on, a strange balance formed. They shared meals and chores, silence stretching less between them. Laughter came once, surprising them both, brief and awkward, but the bargain remained, unspoken and heavy. The town's eyes did not leave. The law's shadow stayed long. One night, a knock came late, sharp and urgent. The rancher reached the door before she could move, his body a barrier without thought. Voices whispered outside, tense and low. She stood behind him, heart pounding, realizing how quickly things could break. Whatever lay beyond that door, it would not be settled easy. The rancher drew a breath, knowing that the choice he had been avoiding was no longer his alone. The land, the town, the bargain all pressed in at once. Behind him, she waited, ready to face what came, whether as a wife in name or something far more dangerous. The knock came again, harder this time, wood rattling in its frame. The rancher did not answer at once. He stood still, listening, weighing the sound of breath on the other side. She stayed behind him, close enough to feel the heat from his back, far enough to leave him room. The house felt smaller than ever, like the walls had drawn in to listen. A voice called his name, rough and low. It belonged to a man he knew from years back, a man who had lost more than he won and blamed the world for it. The rancher opened the door just enough to speak, keeping his body square in the opening. The man outside smelled of whiskey and wet leather. He said there were questions in town, said people were curious about arrangements made in the dark. He said curiosity could turn ugly if left alone too long. The rancher answered slow, telling him to leave. The man laughed, not kindly, and let his gaze drift past into the house. She did not look away. She had learned that fear shown was fear taken. After a long moment, the man stepped back, muttering about debts and favors and how nothing stayed hidden forever. His boots faded into the night, leaving the yard quiet but charged. The door closed, the bar slid back into place. Neither of them spoke. She realized her hands were shaking and clenched them tight. He noticed and said nothing, only poured water from the jug and set it near her. It was a small thing, but it steadied her more than words could have. Sleep did not come easy. She lay listening to every sound, every shift of wind. He sat at the table long after the lamp should have been out, staring at the grain of the wood. He had known trouble would follow, but he had hoped for time. Time to figure a way through that did not crush someone already bent low. By morning, the town felt closer, like it had crept nearer overnight. He rode in for supplies, leaving her with instructions to keep the door barred and the rifle close. She nodded, trying not to show how that frightened her. Alone, she cleaned and cooked, her thoughts turning over like stones in a river. She wondered if safety was ever real or just borrowed until the world came to collect. In town, eyes followed him. Men nodded with meaning. Women whispered behind gloved hands. At the store, a clerk mentioned the preacher planned a visit, said it would be good to see things made proper. The rancher thanked him and left without buying more than he had to. Outside, a notice was nailed crooked to a post, talking about unpaid debts and seized land. He read it twice, then turned away, a knot forming in his gut. Back at the ranch, she saw him coming from a distance and felt relief she did not try to hide. He dismounted and handed her the supplies, then told her what he had heard. The preacher, the bank, the town all pressing in from different sides. She asked if he regretted the deal. He said regret was a luxury he could not afford, but that did not mean he would stop trying to do right. Days turned tight and narrow. A woman from a neighboring spread came by, friendly but sharp, asking how married life suited her. She answered careful, keeping her words plain. After the woman left, she sat by the window, watching dust drift, feeling like she was on display. The rancher found her there and apologized for the town. She told him he did not make the world the way it was. One evening, she asked him why he had agreed to pay in the first place. He hesitated, then told her about the bank, about the threat of losing the land that held his family's bones. He said a wife made him look settled, made the bank hesitate. He did not say he had been lonely, he did not need to. She heard it anyway. She told him pieces of her own story, not all of it, just enough to show the road she had walked. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he said the world had no right to demand so much from her. She almost laughed at that, but the sound stuck. Trouble did not stay at the edges. One afternoon, riders cut across the far pasture, not stopping, just making sure they were seen. The cattle stirred, uneasy. The rancher counted the riders and memorized their shapes. That night, he checked the fences twice. She helped, holding the lantern, her shadow stretching long across the ground. She began to notice changes in him. He spoke more, small things about weather and work. He asked her opinion on repairs, on planting. It felt strange to be asked, stranger still to be listened to. She did not let herself believe it meant safety. She had learned better than that. The preacher arrived on a Sunday afternoon, Bible tucked under his arm, smile practiced. He spoke of vows and appearances, of how marriage was a shield against sin and gossip. He suggested a public show, a proper ceremony. The rancher thanked him and said they would consider it. After he left, silence fell heavy. She asked him what would happen if they did not comply. He said the town would push harder, might even bring the law to inspect things too closely. Papers could be questioned. Deals could be exposed. She felt the trap tighten, each path leading to loss. At night, she dreamed of running, of open roads and no one calling her back. She woke with the truth heavy on her chest. There was nowhere to go that would not cost her more than she had left. He dreamed, too, of standing alone on empty land, the house dark behind him. One evening, voices rose outside again, more than one this time. He told her to stay back, his voice firm. She ignored him, staying close enough to hear. The men talked about money owed, about favors traded. One of them laughed about the wife bought fair and square. The rancher's temper flared, words sharp and final. He told them to leave his land. After a tense pause they did, but not before promising they would return. When the yard was quiet again, she stepped forward, anger breaking through fear. She told him she would not be the reason he lost everything. She said if leaving would save him, she would go. He answered just as fiercely, telling her he would not trade her safety for land. The words hung between them, raw and dangerous. The balance they had found began to crack. Care turned to concern. Concern edged toward something neither was ready to name. The town sensed it, like animals scenting blood. Pressure mounted from all sides, and still no choice led cleanly out. As another storm gathered on the horizon, dark and low, The rancher stood on the porch with her beside him, watching the sky bruise. Somewhere beyond the hills, decisions were being made that would reach them soon. He knew the next step would demand more than silence and good intentions. She knew whatever came would test every promise made without words. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the sound of distant thunder, and neither of them moved to go inside. The storm broke before dawn, thunder rolling low and steady, rain sweeping across the land in sheets. The rancher was already awake, boots on, coat pulled tight. He moved through the house, checking doors and windows, the habit of a man who had learned to expect trouble when the sky turned dark. She watched him from the kitchen, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, feeling the tension in the air settle into her bones. By mid-morning the rain eased, leaving the ground slick and heavy. That was when the first rider appeared, then another, and another after that. They came slow, spread wide, like men who meant to be seen. The rancher counted them, his jaw set. She stood beside him on the porch, the smell of wet earth thick around them. No words were spoken, but they both understood what this meant. The waiting was over. The riders stopped just short of the fence. One stepped forward, the same man who had laughed too easily in the night before. He spoke about debts, about promises made in quiet corners of town. He said the bank wanted answers, and so did a few men who felt cheated out of their share. He looked at her when he spoke, his eyes cold and measuring. The rancher told him there would be no answers given in the yard. He said if they had business, they could take it to town, under daylight and witnesses. The man smiled thin and said witnesses could be arranged anywhere. The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands resting easy where they should not have been. She felt fear rise sharp and sudden, but she did not step back. She had learned that fear only fed men like these. Instead, she spoke, her voice steady, reminding them she was not property to be traded again. The words surprised even her. For a moment the men hesitated, not expecting a voice where silence had been assumed. The moment passed. The leader laughed and said words were cheap, just like papers. He claimed the marriage was a lie, a cover to move money and hide deals. He said the law would see it that way if pressed. The rancher felt anger burn hot, but he kept his tone even. He said the law would also see threats and trespass. He told them to leave. They did, but not far. The riders moved off to the edge of the property and waited. The message was clear. They were not finished. Inside, the house felt tight, airless. She paced while he sat at the table, head in his hands. He admitted what he had not said before, that part of the money had come from a loan he could not repay soon. He said the men outside had backed it, expecting control in return. She listened, understanding how traps were built one small choice at a time. She asked him why he had not told her sooner. He said he did not want to burden her more than she already was. The words stung, but she saw the care behind them. She told him they were already bound in this, whether by paper or danger, and hiding truth would only make it worse. By afternoon, the preacher arrived again, summoned by rumor and worry. He spoke of peace, of settling matters quietly. The rancher listened, then asked plainly if the preacher would stand by them if the town turned ugly. The preacher hesitated, his answer careful and thin. That hesitation told them everything. As evening fell, a plan began to form, rough and risky. The rancher would ride to town at first light to face the bank and the law head-on. He would bring the papers, the truth, all of it. She insisted on going with him. He argued at first, fear edging his voice. She reminded him that hiding her only fed the lies. At last he agreed. That night they sat together in the dim kitchen, sharing coffee gone cold. Outside, shadows moved, men keeping watch. Inside, something shifted between them, a quiet understanding born of shared risk. He told her that whatever happened, he would not let her be used again. She told him she believed him and meant it. Sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of standing in a crowded room, voices rising, fingers pointing. She woke to the sound of boots outside, then the low murmur of men arguing. The rancher was already at the door, listening. When silence returned, it felt louder than noise. Before dawn, they saddled the horses. The sky was pale, the land washed clean by rain. As they rode out, the riders at the edge of the property watched, but did not follow. Not yet. The road to town stretched long and open, every mile tightening the knot in her chest. In town, the streets were already stirring. Word had spread faster than expected. People gathered, pretending not to stare. The rancher went straight to the bank, she at his side. Inside, the air was thick with ink and old wood. The banker listened with narrowed eyes as the rancher laid out the truth, the loan, the threats, the marriage that was real in all the ways that mattered, if not the ones written down. Voices rose. The men who had waited outside the ranch arrived, pushing into the room with practiced ease. Accusations flew, sharp and loud. Someone mentioned fraud. Someone else spoke of contracts. She stood silent until the weight of it pressed too hard. Then she spoke again, telling her story plain and clear. She spoke of being paid for, yes, but also of choice, of refusing to be owned. The room went quiet. The law arrived late, a man with tired eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened to all sides, his gaze lingering on the men who shifted too much. He asked for papers, for witnesses. The preacher was sent for. Neighbors were questioned. Time stretched thin. Outside, clouds gathered again, the sky darkening as if mirroring the mood inside. She felt the pull of hope and fear in equal measure. The rancher stood beside her, solid and steady, his presence a promise more binding than any paper. As the arguments sharpened, one of the men made a mistake, letting slip a detail that did not match the story they had agreed on. The law noticed, the banker noticed. A murmur ran through the room. The balance began to tilt, just slightly. But it was not enough yet. Not enough to end the threat, not enough to free them from the bargain that had started it all. The law called for more time, more review. Decisions were delayed. The men outside smiled again, confident in delay. As dusk fell, the rancher and the woman stepped back onto the street, no safer than when they arrived. The town buzzed with talk, with sides taken and bets made. The men who wanted control lingered close, their patience thinning. They rode back toward the ranch under a darkening sky, the air heavy with what was still to come. Neither spoke. Each was lost in thought, knowing the next move would decide everything. Ahead, the ranch waited, quiet and exposed. Behind them, trouble gathered strength. When they reached the gate, she reached for his hand, a brief touch full of unspoken resolve. He squeezed back once, hard before letting go. The night settled around them, thick with tension, and somewhere in the dark, plans were being made that would soon force the final stand. Night settled heavy over the ranch, the kind of dark that pressed close and listened. The wind moved low through the grass, carrying the distant sound of hooves. The rancher knew before he saw them that the men had come back. This time they did not bother to hide. Lantern light bobbed near the fence, voices sharp and impatient. The waiting was done. He told her to stay inside. She shook her head, fear and resolve tangled tight. She had stood too long in the shadow of other people's choices to step back now. He did not argue again. There was no time left for that. The men crossed the fence without asking. Words were exchanged, heated but controlled until one voice rose too high. That was when the law arrived, not from town, but from the road, dust rising behind a small group of riders. The tired-eyed lawman rode at the front, flanked by two deputies and, to the rancher's surprise, the banker and the preacher. The lawman dismounted slow, his hand resting easy at his side. He said there had been enough talk and not enough truth. He said papers had been checked, stories compared. The mistake from earlier had not gone unnoticed. The men who claimed debts shifted, their confidence slipping. The banker spoke next, clearing his throat. He admitted the loan had been mishandled, backed by men who had no right to it. He said the bank would not stand behind threats or force. The preacher added his voice, quieter but firm, saying marriage was not a tool to be twisted for profit. Eyes turned toward the men who had ridden in so sure of themselves. One of them tried to laugh it off, tried to speak his way free, but the lawman stopped him short. He said there would be no more riding roughshod over folks who could not fight back. He said the ranch was not for sale, and neither was the woman standing on the porch. The air went still. The men realized the balance had shifted too far to reclaim. One by one, they backed away, anger burning, but checked. The lawman watched until they were gone, their lanterns swallowed by the dark. Silence followed, deep and heavy. She felt her knees weaken now that the danger had passed and sat on the step. The rancher joined her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither spoke for a long moment. The lawman told them the bank would restructure the debt, fair and clean this time. No hidden hands, no favors owed. He said the town would be watching less closely now, satisfied with truth brought into the light. Before leaving, he looked at them both and said choices made under pressure still counted when stood by afterward. When the yard was empty again, dawn was not far off. The sky lightened at the edges, birds beginning their first calls. The rancher stood and offered her his hand, helping her up. His grip was steady, warm. In the days that followed, the ranch slowly returned to its rhythms. Fences were mended without looking over a shoulder. Neighbors kept their distance at first, then began to nod again, curiosity replaced by something like respect. The preacher returned once more, this time without pressure, offering quiet words and leaving without demands. One afternoon she sat at the table with papers spread out before her. They were simple documents, honest ones, stating what had already grown between them. He watched her read, his chest tight. He told her there was no debt left to hold her, no bargain unpaid. He said if she stayed, it would be because she chose to. She looked up at him, eyes clear. She said she had chosen days ago, when he stood between her and men who thought money made right. She said the ranch felt like a place where she could finally stand without shrinking. They signed the papers together, hands brushing, neither rushing. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, no longer feeling like a cage. The house felt different too, lighter, filled with the promise of voices and shared work. Seasons turned. The ranch weathered another winter, then bloomed into spring. She planted a small garden near the house, laughing when the first shoots broke through. He built a new fence along the south pasture, stronger than the last. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sky change, talking about small things and plans that reached just far enough. The town accepted them in its own slow way. Whispers faded. Stories changed shape. What remained was a simple truth that people understood. Two lives had crossed under hard terms and chosen a better path. One night, as stars filled the sky, she rested her head against his shoulder. He told her he had never thought happiness would look so quiet. She smiled and said quiet was exactly what she wanted. The ranch stood firm under their care, a place no longer ruled by silence or fear. It held laughter now, shared meals, the steady comfort of knowing tomorrow would come and be faced together. The bargain that had started it all was nothing more than a memory, replaced by something stronger and freely given. As the fire burned low and the night wrapped around them, they sat side by side, no longer bound by money or pressure, but by choice. And in that choice they found a future that felt earned,